Hello everyone and welcome to this new tutorial. On this tutorial we will see how we can combine the powers of Pandas data frames with PostgreSQL's databases, or more specifically with tables inside of those databases. So both of these technologies are very famous, and the reason you may wanna do something like this may depend. So maybe let's say you use Pandas better for, let's say, data processing, or maybe someone on the team is more familiar with PostgreSQL, or even let's say in your workflow one of these technologies is more suited. So like I said, the reason might depend immensely. That's why learning this skill will get you ahead of the curve. So to combine these two technologies, we usually only need two packages. The first one is obviously Pandas, and the second one is SQL Alchemy. So SQL Alchemy is what's known as an ORM, or Object Relational Mapping. And basically ORMs are used in applications to convert the data from the database to the application, or vice versa, in an object-oriented way, and they are pretty complex in their usage. So we usually find them in mobile or web applications. In our case, we will use it to integrate it with Pandas. We will also check another package, which is the first package we will check, and that is psycopg2. So the reason we want to check psycopg2 first is because ORMs usually use what's known as database drivers, and by default SQL Alchemy uses psycopg2 as a database driver. That's why it's recommended to know psycopg2 better. And also psycopg2 is way simpler in usage than SQL Alchemy. And another reason is that if you have a Python script and you wanna integrate it with PostgreSQL, usually you can achieve all what you want using psycopg2. Only complex stuff requires SQL Alchemy, like integrating with Pandas Dataframes. So let's get started. To showcase what psycopg2 can do, we will use it to first create a database and then create a table inside that database and insert some data, and then we can pass to psycopg2. So right here I mentioned the steps that we should always follow, like create a connection, create the cursor. These two are mandatory, and so are the last two, the commitment and the closing of the connection. And our code basically is here, so this is what we will change all the time. So let's get started. We first import the package, and for that we use import psycopg2, and if you don't have it installed, you can always go, let me clear the terminal, and just write pip install psycopg2 and SQL Alchemy. If you are on a Mac, you may come across some errors, so you may want to try pip3 or even Python. Then the version you have installed, in my case, is 3.10-m, and you can run the script. As you can see, for my case, both are requirement already specified. We can see SQL Alchemy and psycopg2. So let's get back to psycopg2. I will import it, and then I will create a connection using the connect method. I will save it to a variable that I will call pgcon equal psycho pg2 dot connect, and in here I can pass some variables. So the first one is the host. In my case it's local host, and localhost is it means just that my database is installed locally. If you have a database installed on some kind of a server, you need that IP address. So the second thing is the user. The user I will be using is Amin. The third thing is the password of that user. So the password that I made for this user is 1234, and the last thing is the database. And for this example I will use the Postgres database, which is the default database, and I will run it, and immediately we get an error. Yes. So now we can create our cursor, and for this we use, let's call it pg cursor. We use the connection, which is pvcon dot cursor. I will run this, and now we have our cursor, and this will allow us to pass on some code. So before I do anything, when creating a new database via psychopg2, we usually want to pass let's say 2 lines of code to bypass some transaction errors. I will just copy these 2 lines of code, and I will come here and just paste them. So you don't need to understand this as a beginner, but usually when creating new database and stuff like that, we wanna pass them. So now we can pass to the actual SQL code. So to pass SQL to our database or Postgres server, we use the execute method. So basically we pass SQL inside of this method. For example, let's say we have a sales database. We can literally just write from, let's say, all select, if I can type select all from, let's say, sales. This is an example, and you would get the sales data that easy. In our case, what we will first do is drop if the database exists and then recreate it. So for that you will say drop database, and you would, if exists first, and you would pass the name. So we will call our database CryptoDB. So I will run the code, and then I will copy it, paste it, and create this database. And for that we use the create database. So if we go to pgadmin, which is the interface for Postgres, before refreshing we can see that we don't have a database called CryptoDB. If we refresh it, we can see the database appear in here, and we can see that the owner of that database is Amin. If we go to schemas and then to tables, we can see that we don't have any table. So now that our database is created, we want to commit the changes, and for that we use the commit method, and basically this persists the changes. If we do some kind of a SQL thing and we don't commit it, it won't be saved. And after that, we close the connection. And with that, we have finished and we have created our database. So now let's see how we can insert database. So first of all, we need some data. Let me go and grab some data. So the most important thing here to note is the data is in the following format. We have a list of tuples, as you can see, and that's very important to be in this format. So we have 1 point. This is some random data. Okay, so first thing first, like always, we want to connect. Let's just copy this code right here and connect to our database. In this case, we don't want to connect to the database Postgres. We want to connect to the CryptoDB. So let me copy that and paste this here. And as we can see, our connection is successful. After that, we want to create the cursor. Same thing. Let me copy this one. Let me insert it here. We want to pass on the required code to bypass the errors. Let's just do that to save some time. And then we can pass to some SQL code. First of all, how we can check if, or should I say, how we can check which database we are currently using. So for that, what we can do is pg cursor, pg cursor.execute, and what we can execute is the following. So let me just stringify this one. Select current database, and after that, the result of our query will be saved on the cursor. So for that, we need to, let's say, if we want to see it, we need to pg cursor, then use the fetch method. We can either use fetch 1, which our case is what we want, since we will have just one response, or we can use fetch all. So if I run this code and we have some errors, select, I keep forgetting the A here for whatever reason. Okay, we can see that CryptoDB is the current database we are using. Now we can pass to the table. Let's say we want to create a table and then pass the data inside of it. First of all, we want to drop that table if it exists. So for that, we will use pg cursor dot execute. We will always use execute, and inside we would pass the following SQL code, which is just standard SQL code. Drop table if exists. Let me capitalize that. Exists, and the name of our table would be, let's say, crypto table. Let me run that, and then let me copy this, paste it, and then we want to let's create the entire table. Okay, let me just copy the entire code of the table and then explain it, because this one we would save some time. So this is just some SQL code, basic SQL code. we want to create the following table. It has an ID of serial. If you are not familiar with Postgres, so basically serial is just an incremented integer. And then you want to pass the name, which is just a var, the symbol, which is also a varchar, which is also a varchar, the price, which is a float point or a decimal, and market cap and volume, which are big int. Big int are basically integers with big numbers. So now we have created our table. If we go back to pgadmin and refresh and then go to tables, we can see that we have the following table, crypto table, and you can see that it's empty. If we open the query tool here and we type, for example, select all from crypto table, and I will just run the code, and you can see that we have a table here, but it's empty. So let's go back to our code. So to insert data in our table, we usually perform multiple, like there are a lot of ways to do that in PsychoPG2. So in this case, we will check two of them. Since we have a list of records that we wanna insert and not just one of them, we will first loop inside each one of them and then insert it. So let me just copy the code, since this is just a basic SQL, and explain it. So we have our variable here, list, called list coins. So we will loop over list coins and name each record coin tuple, and then we will use the execute command to simply pass on some basic SQL code. Insert into the crypto table with pass what you want to insert, and note here that you don't have the ID. This one is not present in here because it's auto incremented and we don't want to pass it. We want to basically Postgres to handle that for us. So what you want to pass is the name, the symbol, the price ID, the market cap, and the volume. Basically everything except the ID. And then we would mention our 5 values. We would pass it in this format, and then in here we would pass another variable, and that's this record. And you want to do that for all of them, basically loop. So let's, okay, another error. List coin, I don't know if oh yes, I didn't run this cell. Sorry about that. So, and that's that. Okay, let me first commit this before I show you, in case we come across any error. So pg-con.commit, and let's pass that, and then let me go to our database. Let's run the code again, and we can see that we have all 5 records. Okay, that worked. Now let's check the second method, which is faster in a way and more clean, which is this one. So for the second method, we need to first import the execute values method, and then inside the execute values method we would pass the first variable, which is our cursor, and the second variable, which is our crypto, our basically SQL code to insert, which is same as the first one. However, note at the end how we specified how many values we have and all of that. In here we don't, we just say values and this one, and then we pass the entire list, so we don't need to write the whole looping thing. In my opinion, this second one is more clean. So remember, before I run the code, we have 5 records. So if I run the code again and commit again, get here and run this one, now we have 10 records, which are basically just 5 and duplicated. So the first one is Bitcoin, second one is Ethereum, and if we go here, the 6th one is Bitcoin and this one is Ethereum. So this is how we can insert data and use basically PsychoPG2 in general. So one more thing we want to see is how we can retrieve data using PsychoPG2. So for that, we simply use the execute method and the select all. So let's say pg cursor dot execute, and inside here we will just pass select all from our table, which is crypto table. Before I run this code, I want to mention something. Same as we did in here, the data will be saved in pg cursor and you need to fetch it. In this case, we fetch it 1 because we got only one value back. But in here, the data will be also saved in pg cursor, but we will have multiple rows. So for that, we need to loop over them if you want to print them in a nice manner. So for row in pg cursor dot fetch all. Let's say we want to print each row, and if we are correct, we will basically have 10 rows back. So if I run this one for from I'm making a lot of mistakes. 4. Okay, and as we can see, we are correct. Now we want to delete our data. The reason we want to do that is because on the next step we will pass to Pandas and SQL Alchemy, and we want to import the data using Pandas. So let's empty this one. For that, we use pg cursor dot execute like always, and then in here, so we will use the truncate. Let's capitalize that. The truncate, let's say close. If you are not familiar with truncate, basically it just deletes the entire data inside of a table. So our table is crypto table, and then we want to restart identity. Yes. So this will delete the entire data from the table, and this one, it will restart the ID. So basically we said here that ID is a serial, meaning it's an integer that will be incremented automatically using Postgres. If we delete the data and keep on adding, Postgres will just keep on incrementing this one. It doesn't matter what was before and all of that. So if we use restart identity, basically Postgres will restart the counter. So let's do that, and then let me commit in here, and let's close the connection. If we go back to pgadmin, run our code, and we can see that our data is gone. So now we can pass to Pandas and SQL Alchemy. So we will use Pandas to import a file and then create a data frame out of it. And let's check the files you will import. So on my folder I have this crypto data CSV and this crypto data Excel file, and I can just import both. Let's check both of them. So let's check the Excel first, and this is the Excel file. So we have 100 records, as you can see 101, but we started at 2, so that makes it 100 record. And what we have here are the names of the crypto, the symbol, the price at this time. We also have the market cap and the volume. And same goes for this CSV file. Okay, so it didn't open for whatever reason. Let me close this one. Don't save. Yes, okay. And this is the CSV one. Basically it's the same data. This one is a CSV format and the other one is in an Excel format. So let's import any one of them using our code. If we go to Pandas, so we first want to import Pandas as PD, and then we want to read the file. So we can read any file, but we will read CSV in this example because it's usually that's the most used. So we will call the file df for data frame is equal to pd dot read CSV, and we will pass the name of the file. In our case it's called crypto data.csv. And let's read it, and then let's display it. And as you can see, here is our data. We have 100 rows and 5 columns, and you can see here on the very far left you can see this index column which is generated automatically by Pandas, so don't mind it. And if you wanted, for example, here to read the Excel, you would say Excel, and then in here we would say XLSX. Okay, XLSX, and then we display it and we get the same results basically. So now let's go to SQL Alchemy. Before I do anything, I want to mention something out. Like we said, by default SQL Alchemy uses PsychoPG2. But the thing is, if you only want to use SQL Alchemy and don't want to use PsychoPG2 independently, you will still need to download it and install it via pip. What I mean by that, you still want to import, let's say, download and install both of them, because SQL Alchemy uses PsychoPG2, but when you download SQL Alchemy, it doesn't download PsychoPG2 automatically. This is just weird, because usually if one package is dependent on another, it downloads it with it, but for this case it doesn't. I just want to mention that out. So we first need to import our engine, which is basically what allows us to do the connection. So from SQL Alchemy, yes, import the create engine. I will run this one, and then I will create the engine. So let me better copy it for you to understand better. Okay, so to explain this better, so to create our engine, we first need a bunch of things. So in here we want to pass our dialect. which is in our case Postgres, or maybe it will be for your case MySQL and stuff like that. And then we would pass the driver, which by default is psychopg2. It's called driver or database API. When I mean that by default it's psychopg2, we can literally just not mention it. It will be the same because it uses by default. So there are a bunch of drivers that Postgres can use and you can search for them, but the most famous is psychopg2 and I recommend that you would use it. And then in here we would pass on the user. In here we would pass the password of the user. In here we would pass the host, and then we would pass the database. So it's just like psychopg2, we just have a different format. And let me just copy this and call this comment, and this comment illustrates better. So we first have the dialect and then the driver, the username, or better it's the user, then the password, the server, and then the database. So let's run this code. Now we have our engine created. So for more data we can just print it, and you see that we have Postgres, psychopg2, we see that the password is not shown, localhost, and crypto data. So we check that everything is correct. Now let's see how we can pass data frames to our table. And the data frame we want to pass is this one. How can we pass this data frame and save it to our SQL table? For that, it's really easy. What we can do is df.toSQL. So df2SQL is a built-in function inside of Pandas, and then in here we would pass the name of the table, which is in our case crypto table, and then we would pass the engine. In our case it's this one, it's already, we called it engine, and then we would pass the condition if exists, and this can take 3 values. The first one is append, the second one is replace, and the third one is fail. So for our example we want to append, and this is what you usually want to do. So let me add some comment here to understand better, or maybe create a new one. So we have either append, or we have fail, or we have replace. So before we continue, let me explain this one. Basically we are telling Pandas that if we already have this table, we already have the data inside this table, if we use replace, meaning delete everything and replace with our data frame. If we use append, we are telling it to append the data, basically leave what exists and append. And fail, we are telling it if you have data exists, do nothing, just stop the operation. Usually what you want is append. You will always want to add on, you don't want to keep on deleting and replacing it. So, and then we want to set index to false. And what this does is, if we go here, we can see that when we imported, Pandas generated this index, like we said. We don't want it, we want to delete it. Okay, now we can run this code. And one thing to mention is, in here we used to commit in the connection. In Pandas we don't do that. When using Pandas, it does that automatically, so we don't need to, let's say, do engine.commit or something like that. and we can check right away. If we go in here and then select all from crypto table and run our code, we can see that we have all 100 records. So now we want to see how we can, let's say, import data to SQL but by chunks. What I mean by that is, let's say we have a lot of data. Let's say we have a table that a CSV, let's say file or something like that, that has 1 million records. And we usually don't want to just, let's say, import all 1 million records and load them into CSV, because the margin of error would be very large. If we have that kind of data, we usually want to import it little by little. And even if, let's say, we are calling a API or something that can provide way more than just 1 million, which is the limit of a CSV file or an Excel file, I should say, in that case, Pandas may not be able to handle it, because Pandas uses in-memory concepts. Basically, it loads the data in memory, and maybe in our machine we don't have that capacity of memory. What I mean by that is, if our machine has 16 gigs of RAM and we want to load some data into Pandas that exceeds 16 gigs of RAM, we can't do that. That's the limit. So in that case, you want to load the data by chunks, and then for each chunk we want to save it to SQL. And let me just copy the code to gain some time, because it's quite the same with just modifications. Okay, so let's first check this first part right here. What we are doing is pd-read CSV, which is the same as we did here. Well, it's Excel, but we first did CSV. If I go just back, okay, it's the same. pd.read CSV, we pass on the name, and then we pass this parameter, which very few people know about. It's called chunk size. And as you can see, we are passing by, in this case, 1000. We can pass, let's say, 2000 records, 100,000 record, 1 record. In our case, we just have 100 in our file, so it doesn't really make sense to even use this, because there will be no error or problems in memory and stuff like that. But this is a great way if you have a file with a lot of data. And we are looping over chunks. For chunk in this file, basically the chunk is a data frame. So chunk.toSQL, same as we did here. That in here we use data frame, and in here we use the chunk variable, and we are just saving it same as in here, so nothing changed. Again, use this one when you have a lot of data. We will not use it because we don't need it. Now let's see how we can do the opposite. Basically bring data from our Postgres and save it to some kind of a data frame. And for that we use the read SQL query. So let's name our variable crypto data df data frame, and like always we use pandas. So pd dot read SQL query, and in here we pass on the query and the engine. So in this case the query is, we want to get all the data, and you can pass on any query in here. I didn't mention that before. So I can pass, let's say, joints. I can do anything. I can pass the where clause and filter the data. I can pass window function. I can basically do anything. The reason I'm just passing simple, or this is simplest SQL of them all, which is the select all from table, is just to get you familiarized with these functions, or the same methods. Read SQL, also to SQL, stuff like that. I don't really care about what SQL we pass in here, because this is not about SQL. It's about how we can integrate them together. But I just want to mention that we can do anything, either with the read SQL query or with the execute method in PsychoPG2, which is this one. So select all, let's say, from crypto table, and then we pass the engine. Yeah, and we can just print it right away if you want to. Command C, Command V, and we can see that we get our data back. So okay, so to visualize that what we are doing is correct, let's say, let's do something in here where, let's say, price USD is greater, let's say, than 100, and run the code. And we can see that we have way less data. We only have 10 records that have basically the price above 100. And if we go here and do the same, okay, if we import all, we can see that we have 100. And if I pass in the where price USD is greater than 100 and then run, we can see that we only have 10. So we are correct. And finally, we can save it back to either Excel or CSV. And for that, we use the name of our data frame. For the Excel, we would say to Excel, and then pass the name. Let's say we will call it new crypto data dot XLSX, and you would set the index to false, so we don't have that index. Okay, let me run this one, and let me copy this code and pass to CSV in here. If you want to create a CSV, the extension of the file is CSV, and let me also run the code. If we go back to our folder, these are the two original data, crypto data and crypto data. This one is CSV and this one is Excel, and these are the new created files. If we open the Excel one, let me make this a little nicer. I think you can see better. Okay, let me make it. That's better. And if I make this bigger for you, you can see that we have the same data, only 10 records, and the ID varies 1, 2, 5, 17 and stuff like that. Basically, these are the 10 records that have a price above 100. So you can just check by the ID 1, 2, 5, 17, and if we go in here, we can see 1, 2, 5, 17. This is the record ID. So with that, we have finished our examples, and I hope you did learn how we can integrate both Pandas and PostgreSQL together. And for more details, I will link the blog for this video in the description. You can read on my blog about it, and you can also grab the code and this Jupyter notebook. So thank you for watching, and I hope you subscribe to my channel, and see you on a next video. Thank you.